All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for tuning in today. You're listening to WRUULP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Sonics Community Radio with Global Soul. This is the Adam Messer Show, and I'm your host, Adam Messer. And today I am here with my very special guest, Jonathan Maberry. Welcome, Jonathan. How are you, sir?
I'm good, and thanks for having me on.
I'm really excited. Folks, for the ones of you who might not know who Jonathan is, he's an author. I've got a bio, Jonathan, if you don't mind. I'd like to just read this out. It kind of summarizes like all the good stuff here. So Jonathan Maberry is a New York Times bestselling author, 5-time Bram Stoker Award winner, 3-time Scribe Award winner, Inkpot Award winner, and comic book writer. His Vampire Apocalypse book series, V Wars, was a Netflix original series. He writes in multiple genres, including suspense, thriller, horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and action for adults, teens, and middle grade. His novels include the Joe Ledger thriller series, Bewilderness, Inc., Glimpse, the Pine Deep trilogy, the Rotten Ruin series, the Dead of the Night series, Mars One, Ghostwalkers, a Dead Land series, and many others. He is the editor of many anthologies, including The X-Files, Aliens, Bug Hunt, Don't Turn Out the Lights, Nights of the Living Dead, and others. His comics include Black Panther, Doom War, Captain America, Pandemica, Highway to Hell, The Punisher, and Bad Blood. He's also a board member on the Horror Writers Association and the president of the International Association of Media Tie-In Writers. So that's a quite a nice resume or curriculum vitae of your work, and that's just a dip in the pool of all the different things that you do.
I'm exhausted just listening.
So, can you give our audience just kind of like an overview? What do you enjoy? What do you like doing?
Well, now that I'm in my 60s, I'm slowing down a tad. I no longer go skydiving or that sort of thing, which was my biggest hobby years ago. I'm really focused on the arts these days. Music of all kinds, watching, live music, dance, very much into TV and film. So anything that involves the arts, I'm kind of deeply into that, and that's kept me relatively sane, I would say. I don't want to make too big a claim on sanity. During the economic downturn and the pandemic. So I got actually even more into the arts during that, read poetry every morning and, just kind of float in that world of artistic creation.
I love the arts, and I feel the same way. I feel like anything creative like that is considered part of the arts, performing arts or visual arts, writing, those kind of things. And I find a lot of creativity doing that as well. Do you feel like that as well?
Well, yeah. And it puts you in a certain zone of creativity. And because you're seeing the innovation other people are doing, it kind of frees you up to take creative risks and try new things. And it's pretty wonderful. And the poetry thing, I've always been a fan of it. Only published a few poems, but been a fan of it. But every morning before I do my writing, I actually read poetry aloud. It puts me into the right zone. Because poetry encapsulates an image or a thought or an experience in just a few words. And that brevity, that concision of thought, is a great gear to be in when you're about to sit down and work on a novel, so that you don't wind up writing a lot of stuff that either doesn't make sense, doesn't really fit the book, or is self-indulgent. Whereas, if you kind of keep that poetic view, you're looking for the skill set to capture, the wonderful elements of your story, and you can do it more if you're in the poetic zone.
I think that is such an interesting way to look at it too, because I love brevity and love concise language. And when you're talking about reading poetry before you start writing, it reminded me of Ray Bradbury. I watched this talk that he did, and he said, if you want to be a better writer, read a poem, an essay, and a short story a night for 1,000 nights. And
that's pretty close. And Ray told me about the same thing when I first met him as a kid.
I was just going to say, you have a tie to Ray Bradbury. You actually knew him and did workshops under him when you were a kid, right?
Well, not workshops. The way it worked is the secretary for the middle school I was going to, or sorry, the librarian for the middle school I was going to was the secretary for a couple of different clubs of professional writers.
Hmm.
One that met in Philly, which was the epic fantasy crowds, Fred DeCamp and George Sithers and Lynn Carter occasionally. The New York crowd was more of a revolving door of whichever big writers were in town, because this is early 1970s. So publishing completely lived in New York. If you were launching a book, you went to New York to launch it.
Okay.
And also, if you were, doing PR for a movie based on your books, a lot of it was done in New York. So I would go up to these meetings, and Ray Bradbury and Richard Matheson and a few other guys were there. And once they realized that I was genuinely interested in being a writer, not just a kid saying that, they went out of their way, especially Bradbury and Matheson, to really, encourage me, answer my questions, give me advice. It was pretty wonderful. It was not in any way official, so what taking any classes, but it was so important to my understanding of the writing life and of the process of creativity. And roll forward, quite a few years later, we got the very last cover quote Ray Bradbury ever gave anyone, it came in just a little too late for the first printing of my first novel, but it did go into the 10th anniversary editions, and that always makes me smile that Ray was proud of me, after all those years.
That's amazing. What was the quote?
Let me see. So I can find it. It is. I first met Jonathan when he was a teenager, and I predicted great things then. And look, he has achieved great things. Jonathan Maberry is a writer whose works will be read for many, many years to come. Ray Bradbury.
Oh my gosh, that is so incredible.
And Matheson also gave us a quote. His was, Maberry has the unique gift of spinning great stories in any genre he chooses. His pine deep vampire novels are unique and masterful.
Oh man.
And I have to admit, I had serious tears in my eyes when we got those quotes. I had no idea that they had been pursuing quotes from them, and oh my God, I cried buckets. No, I'm not even going to pretend I didn't.
Oh, I would have too if it had been me. I mean, it's one of those things where you work so hard that you became a peer. So.
Well, I'm not going to ever say that I'm a peer with those guys, but at least I'm playing in the same playing ground. So I'll go that far.
Well, I think it's a wonderful thing, especially with that experience, because there's so many people out there, Jonathan, who want to become writers. There are a lot of people that, and one of the things I found fascinating, because you held this seminar a couple weeks ago as a charity benefit, and you were talking about the business of writing, and one of the things I really found fascinating was when you were talking about the amount of people who want to write versus the amount of people who actually finish a draft, and then the folks that go on to publish. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Hold on a second. For some reason, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear. Well, it's still a little low, but I can hear you.
Okay, let me see if I can boost it up. Is that better?
Nope.
Let's see. I'm gonna try this other. Give me just a second. I'm gonna try the other aux port here. I'm sorry, this one's not working right. Oh, apologies here, everybody. We're having a little technical difficulties. I'm using an aux port for our soundboard, and it just disconnected. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Okay.
Hello? And we just lost him. Let's see. Let's see if that'll work.
Hello?
Hey, Jonathan, it's Adam. Can you hear me?
Adam?
Yes, can you hear me?
Apparently you are having some sort of technical issues over there.
Okay,
I don't know if you can hear me, but...
Let's try this. I'm going to try this another way. Hey, Jonathan, hold on one second. I'm going to try this another way. That for some reason the aux isn't working, but I'm going to put it over a microphone real quick. Yeah, my apologies. Yeah, let's see here. I don't know what happened. Okay, let's try that again.
Okay.
right, I've got this over. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so it's just a little, the aux, for some reason the aux stopped working, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah, we are live on the air, and so I'd ask you about the, when you're talking about the business side of it, that with authors, that there are a lot of people who want to write. There are only so many that finish a draft, and then so many that publish. And I was asking if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the thing about finishing a draft, getting your career up and going is you got to be a bit relentless with it. You can't let things get in the way. You have to set a standard for yourself as if you were employed doing this. So you need to book out a certain number of minutes or hours a day. You have to write consistently. You have to not only learn the craft of writing, and that means going beyond your natural storytelling gifts to augment that with things that we learn, like learning how to use figurative and descriptive language, learning the different variations of pace and voice and tone and so on. All of that's a constant work in progress. And at the same time, you want to learn the business side of things, because writing, and I am going to quote Ray Bradbury, he said, writing is an intimate conversation between you and the reader. It is pure art. Publishing is a business whose sole concern is selling copies of art. The people in publishing may come to publishing because they love books, but their job is to sell copies of books. They have no obligation to buy anything from you that is not something they think they can sell. It's not, they don't say, oh, that book is so great, let's invent a new shelf for it because it doesn't fit anywhere else. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. In marketing, it's too ponderous. So if you learn how the business works, and how to do the business side of things, the creative side of things, and constantly improve your understanding and your skill set in both, there's no reason you can't do it. You can always become a better writer. You can always become a more skilled business person. But you got to be in there doing the work to acquire that skill set and refine it constantly. There's no secret formula for it. It's unfortunately, it's a lot of hard work, but at the same time, there are people out there who are always willing to help. I mean, I have the Writers' Coffee Houses, which are free networking sessions every month for writers. We have 18 of those around the country. There are writers' newsletters, writers' groups. There's always someone there who's willing to help, because the truth is, we in the industry want and need more people in the field. We want those new voices, because that keeps the reading public enthused, excited, and it just supports the whole industry of writing and publishing. So know that not, if you're working on a book, you're not only doing something that will speak to you, what your own needs, creative needs and desires are, but the world is waiting for those books. We want to read those books.
That's a great point. I'm going to play real quick one of our announcements, and I'm going to try to get this aux set back up so that we can hear it a little bit better.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for
summer break because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet?
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why.
Jonathan, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I got it. I don't know what happened there. I think the somehow or another that the thing bumped, and anyway, I wanted to get you back on the aux because it sounded a lot better when we do that. But I'm going to come back in just like 10 seconds here.
Sure.
Thanks for your patience.
No problem at all.
We got
and there's a lot of technical stuff that goes on, so we're good.
Well, we have a soundboard that's from it's in great shape, but it's like from the 80s, so it's a little temperamental sometimes with the aux cords, and that's the only way that I've been able to do these phone call things. So, but it's coming across good now, so I'm pretty excited about it. So let me get back over here and all right. Okay, everybody, we All right, everybody, thank you very much. We are back in the studio, and I think I've got the aux issue fixed. Jonathan, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Awesome. All right, perfect. I'm not going to touch the cord again. I'm going to leave it as it is. And I that was one of the things I enjoyed doing when I went, because everybody, we just recently met. I reached out to Jonathan after I saw a post of yours and said, hey, I would love to talk with you because I talk with authors on the radio, and I feel like your message is really important because, you know, you have achieved that level of professional writing that a lot of people want to get to. The thing that really appealed to me was that you want to give back and that you're very professional about your business and that you want to encourage other authors who are, you know, maybe whatever level of their career to go for it. And yes. I think that's so important because I see a lot of people who are indie authors. I see a lot of people who are you know, best-selling authors or, you know, whatever. And the one thing that I don't hear a lot of is the business side of it with writing. And my background is in business and leadership, so that was just like right up my alley. And I was like, oh man, there's a guy who is talking my language and I want to hear more. So I thought that was a really great seminar that you did. And the Writers Coffee House that you have, I think is a wonderful resource for people that, you know, there's all kinds of sides of publishing. You know, you don't necessarily have to be an author, y'all. You could be an editor, you could be a proofreader, you could be, you know, there's a lot of different things that go into the publishing side of things. Mm-hmm. So, oops, what in the world? One of the things I wanted to ask you, actually, let me pop up the question. We had a reader that had marked on the. I made a post, and there's one of the readers had said, her name, I'm not sure, it's Robin Marks said, or questioned, said, how do you build trust with publishers, agents, and colleagues as a fledgling writer?
Well, a lot of it is they're expecting you to make something, because, you know, being a writer doesn't come with a knowledge of how publishing works. You know, we have to look. So a lot of it is they're going to be naturally cautious because there's a long history of writers making a bit of a problem for themselves in how they deal with agents and editors. And part of it is they expect, you know, they have an unrealistic view of what it means to be an agent or editor, and they have often an unrealistic view, and forgivably so, on about how their career is likely to go. Like in the movies, you see somebody, they sell a book, you know, a character sells a book, and then they do this little montage, and suddenly that person is on the bestseller list. And, you know, very, very few people actually make the bestseller list. And even writers who make the bestseller list aren't on that list every time they publish a book. It does not work that way. I mean, with a select few writers, sure, but it's not how it really works for the most part. And so you have to learn, you know, what does the business require of you? What's the etiquette for different sorts of things? How often do you call? How often do you know, when do you wait? When do you push? Those are things that are often unique to different agents and editors you deal with. And you have to learn their habits as well, because they're ordinary human beings. There's not one set of guidelines for how to be an agent or an editor. So you pay attention to how they deport themselves and use it as a teachable thing. And at the same time, you know, you look for how they're responding to what you're saying. You know, are you pushing too hard? Are you emailing too often? For example, early on, since I had no idea how any of this worked, I tended to email my agent a little too often. And I noticed that her emails slowed down a little bit. It was a very calm way of letting me know that maybe I should just, you know, chill a tad. So you look for those types of clues, and you adapt to it so that you become a partner with an agent, not a pain in the butt because you're constantly calling, constantly, you know, whatever. All that said, at the same time, they are looking for you to have an understanding of how the business works. So if you can, do your research, learn how the business works, even if it's just from a beginner's perspective, that helps make the editor or agent feel more comfortable and therefore more willing to include you in the various steps of the submission process and so on. There's a lot more to this, and if anyone has any more specific questions on different aspects of it, I'll be happy to answer those. But it is a complicated thing.
One of the things I like that you do as well for talking about learning the business or learning, that side of publishing, you actually have a ton of free stuff for writers on your website.
I do. And if you go to my website, it's Jonathan Maberry, M-A-D, not M-A-Y, M-A-B-E-R-R-Y.com. There's a page called Free Stuff for Writers. I think it's really important for those of us in the business to share as much as we can with those who are trying to get into this business for a couple of reasons. One, it is a myth to believe that writing is a competition. It's a crowded field and you're not going to be able to get in, blah, blah, blah. It's actually not true. The writing field is wide open for new talent. New talent builds our industry. New talent is something that we really, really want. So if we encourage other writers by giving them some information, maybe a tip, whatever, we're able to then help our own industry stay strong and continue to grow, because we are encouraging more people to get into that field, which will make the entire industry rise. So it's all upside as far as helping other people. It's fun to do it, and we do it as altruistically, but at the same time, it's also good business to do it because it strengthens the industry that we're in. So it's a win-win.
I agree with you on that. I think it's a important, I know this is a phrase that Craig Martell uses, but a rising tide lifts all boats. It's not his original one, but obviously it's a really good phrase. And but I love that mentality, because we are not a competition to each other. If someone, for example, like you doing this interview today, this is not a competition to someone else who interviews you on a different show. It's complimentary, and I think that's a great viewpoint that you have, that the industry, the publishing industry, they need, fresh blood. They need new, not to make like a vampire reference, but, they need some fresh blood because, the next person who's out there might have, the best story that you've ever heard. You never know.
A good example of that is, vampire fiction had started to really fall apart in the late 60s, early 70s. There just wasn't much of it. It wasn't going well because everybody seemed to feel that, it had been there. We'd seen it already. And then Anne Rice came along with Interview with the Vampire, a book that was in the genre, but yet so fresh, such a fresh voice, such a fresh approach, that it exploded and actually gave birth to a lot of the goth community that we now have across the country. Around the same time, Stephen King did Salem's Lot, which kind of gave a new birth to the Dracula style of vampire storytelling. Mm-hmm. And we were off and running again. That's the sort of thing that happens. In the zombie field, you see that all the time. You think, well, you've seen every version of the zombie story, and then Isaac Marion does Warm Bodies, and Mike Carey does Girl with All the Gifts, and Carrie Ryan does Forest of Hands and Teeth. Max Brooks does World War Z. Mm-hmm. All of those books are in the genre, but they're so completely different that it reinvigorates the excitement about the genre. And we wound up seeing a lot more works being added to it. And again, rising tide lifts all boats, because mm-hmm. that's extremely accurate.
I agree with you. I see that a lot too in comic books, because I'm a big comic book reader, mm-hmm. and you'll see where they'll shelve a character for a little while and then they'll come back up. I mean, I think one of the best examples of that was the Avengers Disney series with the movies, because when Marvel and Sony made their deal, a lot of the characters that were left over were just really not selling that well in the comics. They were like huge, in the '60s, and they were what helped build Marvel as a company with their characters. But they really weren't selling a ton of books, and so these characters that they had left over when Disney came in, they took these Avengers and they made this whole new universe of movies based off of these characters that we've all known, or at least the comic book nerds, we know, but we never saw them in this light,
Right.
And I think that's a great example of a resurgence of these characters that we pulled out. Even how their workaround with the Hulk, not being able to do a standalone movie, the way that they tied in the Hulk's story throughout the different Marvel movies, I felt like was really great. Because they gave, even though he had like a little mini story in each one, it all kind of tied together when you got to Endgame and all. So I think it's
that's an example of a visionary. Kevin Feige is a visionary with Marvel, and he decided he wanted to do Marvel the fan way, as opposed to trying to reinvent it for people who never saw it.
Right.
And that was something that you would have thought other people would have done, but really they haven't. Like, much as I love, the Batman movies, they keep reinventing it.
Right.
And they, it took a long time for them to tie in Wonder Woman and Superman to those films, and they did it in a way that was not the version that we saw in the comics. And as a result, people were not as enthused about it. Marvel, they realized that the reason those comics have been selling so well all these decades is because the fans love those versions of them. And that what should have been an obvious thing became a novel thing, but it took a visionary to be able to do it, and Kevin Feige was that visionary.
Yeah, I think it's one of the cool things about any kind of story arc that you like. Somebody's going to come along and do something fresh and new. Like you've got several books coming out, but one of the ones I've already pre-ordered was the AVP versus Predator, Aliens versus Predator, and that, I know that sounds crazy, but I've always liked the movies, and I like the AVP movie, even though some people are like, oh, I don't really care about it. It was one of mine. I liked the original Predator with Schwarzenegger. It was like awesome. Aliens, of course, is another awesome series, so I'm looking forward to reading that. Your take on that story arc. So,
well, that's a lot of fun. That's an anthology, but the licensor Fox had requested that I write a story for it as well. Usually editors don't write stories for their own anthologies, but if with media tie-in, and that's what that is, the license holder gets to call the shots. But what I did for fun in that is I actually wrote my story in collaboration with Louis Ozawa Chang Chen, who played Hanzo in the third Predator movie, Predators, one set in the alien world. So he and I actually wrote a story together that's a direct sequel to that movie.
Oh, wow.
And we had a blast doing it.
Oh,
and then we brought a whole bunch of other great writers, Scott Sigler and Steven Sears, and just all these other great writers to write brand new stories in that world. And we picked people who actually knew that world. So each of the writers in there has emotional investment as well as good ideas and of course a strong skill set. So we had a blast with that. It comes out in November. We're actually engaged in the very last round of edits on it right now. And when I'm done this call, I'm going to be going back to work on that project.
Oh, that's nice. We've got to take a break real quick, Jonathan, to do the station IDs and all. We'll be back in about 2 minutes, everybody. This is the Adam Messer Show. I'm your host, Adam Messer, here today with my very special guest, Jonathan Maberry. And stay tuned with these station announcements. We have some important information for you.
With hunger, how would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for
summer break because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet?
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming, and it doesn't just mean that we are a voice for the community. It also means that we are counting on the community to keep us going. and you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to wruu.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
Okay, everybody, and we are back here in the studio with Jonathan Maberry, and we've been talking about the business side of publishing and writing, and just before the station announcements, we were talking about the new Aliens versus Predator. Jonathan Maberry is the editor and also going to be co-writing a story in there. You do a lot of different projects, and you have a lot of different genres that you cover. I know another series that you have a new release coming out next month is your Joe Ledger series, right?
Yes. Yeah, book 12 in the series, the overall series, and book which also is book 2 in the Rogue Team International series, Relentless, is coming out July 13th. And, it's a heck of a dark book. For those who have read the last book in the series, you know that things ended very, very, very badly for Joe, the hero, and he is looking for some serious payback in this book. And it is not it's not a book for the faint of heart. It's pretty intense. I had a lot of fun with this book.
Yeah, I'm looking at the blurb now. It says Joe Ledger's world has been torn apart. The people closest to him have been savagely murdered, and Ledger is on the hunt for the killers. His already fragile psyche has cracked apart, allowing a dangerous darkness to overwhelm him. That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it's a kind of a PTSD sort of thing, but that particular character has always had a degree of PTSD. So I just simply took a broken character and broke him even further. And I got a lot of hate mail from folks who said I was being unkind to the character at the end of the last book. And it's like, well, two things. First, he is fictional. And second, we writers, we're not in the business of giving happy people a good day. Our job is to mess with their lives and then give them the opportunity to rise above that, whatever the conflict or issue is. And, Joe, I've messed with Joe for, a long time now. And this is the next stage in his development, growth. I'm not sure exactly what phrase is really appropriate for that.
His character arc or whatever, right?
Yeah, there have been a lot of arcs with that character, so this allows me to push him in a new direction and also, push the emotional buttons of the readers a bit, because they don't want just another rinse and repeat book.
Right.
Want to keep going deeper and explore more with your characters.
I love that you write different genres, because my background is kind of similar with that. I love comics. I love like action thrillers. I love horror. And with this character that you've built, now I'm gonna be honest with you, I haven't read any of your stuff. That's why I picked up this Vampire Slayer's Field Guide to the Undead, and I pre-ordered your AVP. But having just met you, and I see the way that, your different stuff is, I'm interested, and so I'm starting to pick up your stuff and reading your stuff. I find your writing career very fascinating too, because what I do with the radio show and interviewing people, and as a writer myself. And I think I wanted to ask you about this. When you're writing in different genres, like say for instance, you're gonna work on the AVP story tonight, editing, and you're in that realm and you're in that genre, and then let's say you have an idea that comes to you about Joe Ledger. How do you pop back and forth between the genres and in your mind? And what do you I want to get that first, and then I have another question I want to ask you about mastery, but it's related.
Sure. All right. So about the jumping from genre to genre, project to project, I generally work on one project at a time, but by at a time, it means I'll block out a certain number of hours per day to work on that project, and I'll block out some time to work on another project. and I do have to shift gears. But because the projects are so different, there's, it's not like I'm writing two of the books in the same genre at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm editing something, that's a different part of my brain. I just simply shift gears into my editor mode, because I'm not in storyteller mode. I'm in a completely different part of that process. It's not as difficult as it sounds to shift gears. Sometimes if you're doing something that is really emotionally powerful, like you're writing a death of a favorite character, or something that's really emotionally challenging, you might need to take a little bit of a break. Sometimes that involves going for a walk, just getting out of that moment, so that when you come back, you're able to then step into a different part of your own brain. And like anything, you do it enough times, it gets easier and easier each time. I write, mystery, science fiction, fantasy, thrillers, epic fantasy, all these different genres. So each book, when I calendar my year, like I just finished my first epic fantasy, I'm writing a post-apocalyptic science fiction now. As soon as that's done, I go back to the second epic fantasy, the 13th Joe Ledger, a military science fiction. Each one of them is blocked out in time, and I don't need to worry about crowding my head with thoughts about the other, genre I'm going to be working on, because I'm not there in that moment. Now, all that said, there are times when you kind of need to really dig down and focus, in which case you just shelve everything else for a while. If a new idea comes up, I keep a Word doc, open on my desk all the time, open my laptop all the time. I just toggle over and make quick notes, and then go back to work on what I was doing.
I like that a lot, because I am very similar in the way that I have different projects that I want to work on, and I see the model of what you've done, and so far, like I've interviewed a ton of people, honestly, Jonathan. I've interviewed a bunch of people, but I've never met any other authors who like to do a lot of different genres, and you've done them successfully. You publish successfully. And so that's the step where I'm trying to get to, where like I have these different stories. I've self-published. I've published some stuff through my own small print publishing, but I want to get to that next stage in my author career. And I find that sometimes it's a little discouraging sometimes, though, too, because, like I'll have these ideas. Like I didn't have a Joe Ledger story last week, but I had one of those same kind of, genre character. My guy's a detective. He's a police detective, and he's got a cold case file. So it's like, I used to love those whodunits, the Murder She Wrote, Columbo, those kind of things. And I know these are more like the Joe Ledgers and the Jack Reachers and that kind of special agent kind of guy, right? I love those too, though, because I used to love James Bond and like The Prisoner and those kind of guys. And I had a story idea last week that hit me, and I spent probably 4 or 5 hours just kind of brainstorming, like, what's this guy look like? What's his background? Where's he from? Who did he grow up with? What did he do? And I had so much fun doing that, but I'm in the middle of writing another story. I'm like 30,000 words into a novel, right? So I was like, oh, I can't just stop this and start writing that.
Well, you can stop stopping it so much as hitting a pause button in order for you to make notes.
Yeah, that's what I was doing. I had a little black and white notebook that I was writing in. So you do that too, like, or you'll have something hit you and you're just like, okay, well, I'll just write some notes.
That's how Joe Ledger was born. I was sitting in a diner, and I was living in Pennsylvania at the time, sitting in a diner doing notes on a nonfiction book. I was just about finished, called Zombie CSU: The Forensics of the Living Dead. It's about how the real world would react if there was a zombie apocalypse. And two characters just started talking in my head. And if you're not a writer, that's a scary cry for help. And if you are a writer, it's just another day on the job.
All right.
And the characters started talking. I can probably sit down and figure out where the origin of those characters came from. They're a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But we writers, we have all these ideas kind of just bouncing around in this like cloud in our brains. And every once in a while, one of them will start talking so loud that we need to pause and listen to it. So I just paused and wrote down the conversation that these characters were having, and made a few quick notes, and then put it aside and went back to the book I was working on. Later on that day, after I finished my projected word count, I went back and took another look at those things, and like, wow, this is something. Who is this guy? Who are these people talking? And so I didn't assume I would remember. I never trust a memory for something like a good idea. So I just made some notes, went back to it later, kind of got back into that groove, and spent a couple of hours developing who that character was. And that, had I not done that, I would not have had the most successful novel series that I've had.
That is really interesting, because like I said, I spent several hours just kind of playing around with who this guy was, letting him tell me, what he was about and who he was. And I'd never done that before, though. Like usually with my characters, they just come to me as I'm writing, like they show themselves to me as they're writing. But I've never had one where I'm fleshing out the character, kind of like, not necessarily like a D&D style sheet, but almost like a bio of a character, right? And
good way to do it.
Yeah, it was the first time that ever happened to me. So that's cool that you had that same, well, not the same, but similar experience where you're like, hey, these guys are talking to me. What's going on?
Yeah, well, that's just kind of proof that you're in the right zone. So listen to it, but don't let it derail you from finishing a project that you are working on, because I'm a big believer in finishing things. Most writers, unfortunately, do not finish, and as a result, they don't get anywhere. And it's not a lack of talent; it's a lack of the focus necessary to finish a project and move the needle on it a bit. It's disheartening that so many writers do not finish a first draft, and they do not ever go into a second draft. They get tired because they have a good idea, jump into that good idea, they start writing that idea, and they're really excited. But then the reality of, well, this is hard work, and it's not something I'm going to finish anytime soon. It's going to take months or years for me to finish it. But I have all these other new ideas. Let me go play with those, and then they never finish anything. They keep jumping and jumping. So there has to be the discipline to finish something. Buy yourself a present for having done it, because it's a rare thing, and then go back to one of those other ideas that you made notes on.
I love that, Jonathan. And I'm not trying to plug myself here at all, okay? But I wrote my third book in my vampire series earlier this year, and I've been working on the first round of edits. And this other book that I'm working on was actually, it's so crazy that you said put it on pause, because this other one I was writing for my Patreon, like a chapter a week thing. And when I was like, okay, I've got to get this third book done, because I long story short, I made some mistakes and I learned from that. And then like this year, I'm like, okay, I've got to finish this book. And so I put the other one on pause. That's the one I'm writing now, to write the third book for the other series. I've been back at this other book, and I went from like 10,000 to like 30,000. I write every day on it, and it just hit me. So I firmly believe in what you're saying is like the best, like the discipline to do it, to finish it. There's a mastery in that. And I actually want to ask you about that with mastery, with the writing craft and finishing, because we've been talking a lot about business, but I want to ask you about this like next session, which kind of ties into what you've been talking about. But I saw this thing today. It was a really interesting little TED talk. The guy, give me a second here, I'll tell you his name, because my friend sent it to me. Darren Daly. Let's see. Yeah, his name is Darren Hardy. He's got a podcast called Darren Daly, and he's got a book out called The Compound Effect. But he was in this TED Talk, and it was about Success Magazine. And one of the things I love about business and leadership is just hearing other people's success stories. And one of the things he said was he interviewed this guy who was 100 years old. And the guy had come here from like the former USSR, which is now part of the Ukraine, and his family lived in what he described as abject poverty. He was an immigrant. The family lived in another family's basement his whole childhood. He grew up. They didn't have enough money, so he had to go to work. He didn't go to high school, didn't graduate high school, but he became a very successful person. And this guy Darren is interviewing him, and he asked the man if he could share his story in his magazine or whatever. And the guy's like, oh, I'm not really sure because I'm really private or whatever. He said, well, what if we did something where we took what you had and we put it into, some kind of writing form so that it could be passed down from, generation to generation with your family. And the guy was like, okay, we could do something like that. And Darren meets the guy a couple weeks later or something like that. And he's excited, and he asked the man if he had written this stuff down, and the man said, yeah. And he handed him like a one-sheet folded up piece of paper. And Darren's like, well, is this it? And he opens it up and he reads it, and the first part of it was that most things you only need to know and do well 2 or 3 things about that to do it really well. And Darren's like, is this it? And the old man was like, that's the problem. You would get something like this, most people would get something like this advice, and they would dismiss it thinking that there's some other, magic formula or whatever, only to realize later on that you had the answer with you the whole time. And so he goes on to say that this guy, the old man was telling him that he wasn't really smart growing up. So he just learned, like whatever job it was, he would learn a couple, 2 or 3 things that he had to learn to do the job right. And he never tried to reinvent the wheel. He just did it the way that they wanted him to do it. And then he got really good at doing that. And I wanted to ask you that question with writing and publishing. What are those couple of things that people should, learn to master and stick with that is persistent throughout their career, or should be?
It's a tough one, because I'm not sure I entirely agree with that viewpoint that you need to learn only a few things, because with writing, you're learning an entire art form. You're learning the how to take an idea and develop that from an idea, which is basically a concept, to a plot. That is a very difficult process in itself. That's important, because without that, you're not going to be able to go from idea to any kind of completed work. You have to know the forms of the different types of things. Like what the short story has a certain type of form. The novel, there are certain forms that work best in novels. You have to know your genre. You have to know the business. You have to know the craft. You have to know the etiquette. So there's a lot that has to go into it. Which is why I suggest that writers actually start investigating a lot of this stuff long before they even break into the business, so that they are prepared to do these things. But it is not as simple as just learning a couple of skills. It's not factory work, where you need to be able to operate that machine with a degree of precision. But there's with this, there's a lot of different machines. You need to know narrative and dialogue, and it's a pretty complex thing. But it's also unlike a factory job, it's a work in progress. So you're not expected to be good at it right away. And even what constitutes good at something is a variable thing, because there are people who are really good at certain parts of the writing world that have no bearing on, say, what I might do in the writing world. And there are things I'm good at that they may never have to do. So you also have to learn which parts of this field are going to play into the kind of writing and publishing that you want to do. It's really complicated. However, groups like the Writers Coffee House and so on are there to kind of help people along, because we don't want people to keep hitting speed bumps and closed doors.
Right. One of the groups I like too, and I'm new to your Writers House, Coffee House group. One of the groups I really enjoy too is the 20 books to 50K group, because
I'll actually be teaching there this fall.
That's awesome. Are you going to do it at Vegas?
Yeah, the Vegas thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that group because they offer a ton of different resources, and they're more slanted towards indie publishing versus
Yeah.
traditional publishing. But the rules for writing and things like that, I think they still apply to everything.
Which is why they invited me to be a teacher, because I'm not an indie published author at all,
Right.
but writing is writing, and even if whether you're managing your own business or working within the publishing industry, there are certain business practices that are good and worth following, and certain ones that you don't want to be burdened with. So I'll be discussing a lot about the business, but also about the craft as well. So, and it's my first time with that group. I know several people who are involved in it. When they asked if I'd like to come aboard as a teacher, I said sure.
I think it's great. Yeah, I've talked with Craig and Mike Anderley. I've had them on the show a couple times, and one of the things I like about what they do, and same thing that like you're talking about, is learning the business, learning the craft. Because I don't know how to say it, but it's like you were talking about the quote with Ray Bradbury about the art of writing and then the craft of publishing, or the business of publishing. Companies are out there to market and sell products, and they don't want to reinvent the wheel. They want to show you something new. They want to get like a T-shirt that's got a new print or whatever, but it's still going to be a standard T-shirt that you're getting it on. Yeah. You're not getting like some funky, weird T-shirt cut with a new print on it. You're getting a comfy T-shirt that you're going to wear that's going to have a kind of print that you like. So it's like something old, something new, familiar or whatever. So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's the industry changes too, and one of the things that's important for us in the industry is to be able to move with those changes, to not resist the change. And a lot of writers also get in their own way by wanting writing to be how they imagined it rather than how it actually is in the moment. And here to tell you, it's all about how it actually is in the moment that matters.
That's a great point. Jonathan, real quick, because we're wrapping up this first hour here, where's the best place that people can find information about your books and everything? Is it the jonathanmaberry.com?
Yeah, if you go to my website, it has links to everything, and information about those things. So that's the easiest way. Also follow me on social media. I'm all over social media. Just search for my name, you'll find me. The key is spelling my name right. People still want to put the Y in the middle of my name, and it's still not there.
Yeah, I can understand that. And your Writer's Coffee House, what is the name of that again? It's the Writer's Coffee House?
Coffee House. There. Prior to COVID, we were in 18 different independent bookstores across the country. Sadly, a couple of those bookstores have closed, and those groups some of the groups are looking for new homes, but I run the San Diego one, which is pretty big. And we have a Facebook page called Writers Coffee House. Anyone is allowed to join that. You don't need to have published. If you just want to be around other writers, be able to ask questions, be part of the community, just look for us, Writers Coffee House on Facebook, and send in a membership request, and that's it. And then once you're joined, you can talk about your writing, you can ask questions, you can network with other writers, you can be part of a community that truly wants you to succeed. So it's really a good group to join, and everyone is welcome.
That's awesome. I appreciate you being on the show with us today, Jonathan, and we'll be back at 4, everybody. So thanks a lot. Just stay tuned and listen to these great announcements.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited